And did the Obama administration intentionally mislead you about the facts in the Iran deal? Now a top White House aide is frantically scrambling to do damage control. Ben Rhodes, the Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications, may have used the press to do this misleading. In a New York Times Magazine profile, Rhodes is quoted as saying the White House created an echo chamber to build up support for the controversial Iran nuclear deal. Rhodes claimed they used friendly reporters to sell the deal to Americans. Former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Ambassador John Bolton, goes on the record. Good evening, sir.
Glad to be here. I think the Obama presidency has used the press, the establishment, mainstream media, more effectively as a propaganda tool than any other administration in American history.
Does not every presidential administration going back decades do a little bit of this misleading, or is this fundamentally different?
I think it's fundamentally different. I think simply the creation of the idea that there was a group of moderate Iranians that were trying to reach a nuclear deal with the rest was a fundamental fabrication, as anybody who knew anything about President Hassan Rouhani's background could have explained. But nobody bothered to ask. Nobody went into it, even though a lot of Rouhani's revelation of his own deception in earlier negotiations had been reported in no less than the august pages of the New York Times.
Ambassador, thank you. Nice to see you, sir.
Thank you.
לא נעים לי להגיד, מבלי לנקוב בשמות, גם האמריקנים מחזיקים כל מיני לשעברים בצה"ל באופן כלכלי, כדי שהם יתאימו את עצמם לעמדות האמריקניות. איזה ניסוח זהיר זה היה?
מובילי דעת קהל שצצים בכל פעם שצריך כאן הגנה על העמדה האמריקאית, ואמרתי הרבה כבר, לא?
אבל אמרת את זה, אבל קחי דוגמה קטרית. השגריר...
I want to add one last thing, because I think it's very important that we understand what we're dealing with here, right? In 2010, according to a report that came out on the eve of America's presidential elections in 2012, in Uvda, the Israeli investigative report, we learned that two of the gentlemen on this panel with us, right, were given an order to prepare the military for an imminent strike against Iran's nuclear installations. And they refused. And
because it was an illegal order.
What?
It was an illegal order.
You were the director of Mossad. You were ordered by the security cabinet.
You don't know what happened there.
This is certainly a matter of interpretation.
And the prime minister, without the authority of the government,
had you not brought in your expert legal opinion to determine whether or not the prime minister of Israel and the defense minister of Israel have a right to order Israel to take action in its national defense, then we would not be where we are today. We would not be in a position where we are now faced with a situation where no international coalition will be built, where now we are seeing the United States moving forward towards the end of the month to conclude a nuclear agreement with Tehran that will enable them to acquire the bomb. We would be in a different position. They changed their mind about enriched uranium 2 years ago, not 5 years ago. We would be in a different position, and I think it is important to understand what we're dealing with here. Thank you.
And the walls are closing in on Donald Trump. As the walls close in on Donald Trump, he is going to be more desperate.
The walls are closing in on the Trump presidency.
I want to begin with the walls really closing in. The walls are closing in.
The investigative walls are closing in.
The walls are really closing in.
The walls are closing in.
Walls are closing in.
The walls seem to be closing in. I'm overusing my cliches.
I hate overusing this metaphor of the walls closing in.
I mean, we've been saying the walls are closing in for 2 years, but it feels like they're actually closing right now.
And as the walls start to close in on the president,
as the walls close in,
he feels the walls closing in.
The walls are closing in is the wrong image, but the bricks are sort of making the roof, buckle.
That's the definition of the walls closing in.
And if this president feels as if the walls are closing in tonight, he's right, because they are.
Coming up next, the walls appear to be closing in.
Welcome back. The walls might be closing in.
Are the walls closing in?
Are the walls closing in?
Sort of where, when you say the walls are closing in.
The walls clearly closing in.
The walls are definitely closing in.
The walls closing in on him.
This is it.
Mueller's walls.
The legal walls.
The walls. The walls.
The walls are closing in.
And the reason is pretty clear. It became clear by, say, a century ago that it was not going to be so easy to control the population by force. Too much freedom had been won. You read the business press, say, 1920s, it talks about the need to direct people to the superficial things of life, like fashionable consumption, and that'll keep them out of our hair. You find this doctrine all through progressive intellectual thought, like Walter Lippmann, the major progressive intellectual of the 20th century. He wrote famous progressive essays on democracy, in which his view was exactly that. The public must be put in their place so that the responsible men can make decisions without interference from the bewildered herd.